Hello, this is Nick, and welcome back to Talking Perspectives. We had a few weeks off as I was gallivanting around Europe, including some time at the night of the Prog Festival in Lorelei, Germany. But we are back, and we are ready to talk. So let's see who we all got here today. We have Mr. Gonzalo Pozo is joining us once again.
Gallivanter.
And joining us from Metal Injection, Prague, and the all myriad of other sites, Mr. Jordan Blum is back with us.
I'm so jealous that you got to go to Europe.
It was fantastic. I could do a whole podcast just about the travels through Europe, but we're not going to do that. We're going to stay music focused, and we have a lot to catch up on, so I'm only going to hit some of the high points from about the last month at Sonic Perspectives. And hit a few things. First off, right before I left, I had an interview with Marco Minin, who performed with the Sea Within at Night of the Prog. Check that out. John had a review of the We Are Sentinels CD featuring Matt Barlow and Jonah Weingarten. Definitely check that out. Machine Head's doing a second leg of the Catharsis tour. Gonzo brought us that news. Big news, we'll mention this later at the end segment, I'm sure, but Haken Lepers and Bent Knee are touring the U.S. together. Thank you for that, Austin. Gonzo did an interview with Tommy Rogers of Between the Buried and Me, hot on our discussion of them and how much we enjoyed Automata 2. Royal Hunt has a new video for Wishing Well and is playing 3 additional European dates. Riverside gave us some more album details. Thank you, Scott. They actually, at Night of the Prog, played a alternate version of the intro track from the new album, which was pretty cool. Let's see here. Scott also had an interview with Bruce Sword of the Pineapple Thief. Arion is releasing a 20th anniversary edition of Into the Electric Castle. Huge news for any Arion fan. And Rodrigo had an interview with Havoc frontman David Sanchez. So there are so many more reviews, interviews, and news articles up at sonicperspectives.com. But from the last month, those are some of the highlights as deemed by me, which is one of the perks of doing this show. I deem the no, that's just a couple of the few I picked up. So let's get into topic number one. Alan Cox did a review of the album. Gonzo did an interview with Michael Romeo. So let's start there. For those who didn't get a chance to check out the interview, what was the high point or two of the interview about the new album, Gonzo?
The high point of the interview? I got to do it twice. That was kind of cool.
I heard about that.
Yeah, so what happened was that, like, shortly after I hung up with Mr. Romeo, my computer kind of went on the fritz, and I lost everything. So we had to do 2 interviews. Turned out that there were going to be 3 because there was like a second aborted one, but that's besides the point. Mr. Romeo is a very, very generous guy with his time and with his words. I've interviewed him many times over the years.
And rumor has it, also a generous lover.
I will take that from you, Nick. But I think that the thing that stuck out most for me was how easily it all came to him. He composed enough material to fill up 2 albums. It's called Part 1 for a reason. There's going to be a second one. And he composed absolutely everything on both parts of the CD. On both CDs within just a few months. And that goes to songwriting, tracking, orchestration, the whole drill. And I thought that was pretty impressive. I also thought it was pretty impressive that he was able to gather a really, really talented group of people to perform on this album. I'd never heard of this guy, Rick Castellano, but apparently he's been, he's just kind of like on the local circuit in the Jersey area, just kind of wailing away with the cover bands. And honestly, dude sounds pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess he learned a thing or two from Dream Theater that you don't put out something and call it Part 1 and not expect a bazillion questions about when's Part 2 coming, of course referencing Metropolis. But that's kind of neat when you can get one out there and you already have 2 kind of in the bag. And, hearing how much he did on the album is certainly cool. And from my perspective, the biggest thing I get out of this album, sadly, is it makes me question why the last few Symphony X albums have been the way they are. Because for me, I found this solo album to be so much more dynamic in some ways and trying a few neat new things. And it's like, why has the last few Symphony X albums, which were mainly Romeo solo compositions, to be honest, so straightforward metal and just non-dynamic when he is capable of this? It's such a good album in many respects. Why weren't the last few Symphony X albums like this? Jordan, any thoughts?
I've only heard the 3 songs that they've released, but I did like what I hear. And I agree that it does. I mean, from what I've heard of Symphony X, I can definitely tell that it's the same person without, even if I didn't know that it was the same person. But yeah, it's dynamic enough, I think, to stand on its own. Especially like sort of like the melodic parts. It's catchy, and I like the orchestral moments. So yeah, I didn't hear as much of it as I wanted to so far, but I liked what I heard.
Mm-hmm. And I have to agree with Gonzo on one point. The singer does a fantastic job on this album. Yet again, especially in the parts where it does sound a lot like Symphony X, it's such an impossible task because, frankly, no one is going to step up to Russell Allen in that role. I cannot think of anyone who is going to sing those songs that it's just always going to fall short, which this singer does a fantastic job, but it's like it still seems like there's something missing. He's just that little bit thinner, doesn't have quite the gravitas to his voice, and it's like, I know it's not Russell Allen, it's not supposed to be on this album, but I still kind of miss that sound when I hear that, that classic Symphony X sound. I need that voice to go with it at this point, but that's no discredit to the album. The album's fantastic, but I just miss it. Gonzo, did you have any particular highlights from the album?
Well, I do question why so many people hate the last few Symphony X albums, or maybe not hate, but just like so passionately dislike. Because I go back, Symphony X and I go way back. We go back like 20 years, and my tastes, my personal tastes, have moved away from that particular style of progressive metal, and I like Symphony X's later output a little more these days. I really like Paradise Lost, for example. I like how heavy and biting and crushing it is. Nothing wrong with the old stuff. It's just kind of not my cup of tea anymore. And War of the Worlds 1 is definitely a throwback stylistically to Symphony X of yore. And it is really cool hearing how so many fans have latched on to that because it harkens back to the Symphony X of yore. But it also brings out, I don't know, maybe hate is too strong a word, but, the last few Symphony X albums are really solid in their own right. And I think they deserve to be judged on their own merit.
And I agree that those albums are very strong albums. I enjoy them a lot. My problem is this. There was this gigantic time between most of them, and you had a band in Symphony X that had a certain dynamic, and instead of growing musically, it seemed like they regressed musically despite the additional time taken. The mix and the sound just became very guitar focused. The symphony kind of left Symphony X, frankly, and the music became very one-dimensional. So while I do enjoy it for what it is, it just seems to be missing a lot. I don't hate those albums, it's just it does not seem to be as special as the early material.
And that kind of gets back to one of the highlights of War of the Worlds. I like how eclectic it is. I like how it borrows from Persian classical music on the song Jinn. I like how it borrows from freaking dubstep, and it actually makes that dubstep metal thing actually work. I remember Korn tried incorporating dubstep into their sound a few years ago, and they went from sounding bad to even worse. Apparently, Michael Romeo is not capable of doing anything that sucks, and I'm okay with that.
Jordan, what is your prior history with Symphony X coming into this?
I listened to V a lot in college, but not in a while. But I know the Odyssey pretty well, and the epic, the title track from the Odyssey is one of my favorite modern sort of epic songs. Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty much perfect.
Okay, so did you enjoy the fact that this new album kind of harkened more towards that end of Symphony X?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember listening to, I think it was Paradise Lost once, and I agree with what you're saying, that it kind of lost the symphony aspect, and it was more like in-your-face guitar-driven, which, I mean, again, I only listened to it once, but yeah, I definitely appreciate the more symphonic aspects of these, and the, as Gonzo said, Persian and diverse influences that are on this one.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely did enjoy the fact that, as Gonzo was speaking to, that not only did it draw from seemed like the older Symphony X sound, but then did draw into completely new areas. Even the older Symphony X, it was progressive metal to a T, symphonic, obviously. But this solo album does draw on, I think, more influences even yet, which was nice to hear. Gonzo, any other thoughts on the album?
It's a solid piece of work. I'm glad that I have it. I'm glad that it's out there, and I'm glad that people are paying attention to it. I think that it's going to play a great deal into shaping the forthcoming Symphony X album. Of course, I mean, it was announced like right before this album was announced that Symphony X would finally end their dormancy. I mean, it's only been like 2 years, but it seems like forever. They're going to be ending their dormancy, and I think that they're going to take the momentum that Michael seems to be picking up from this album. I think it's going to roll into that, and I think that the fans are really going to enjoy that.
All right, so there you have it. War of the Worlds Part 1, Michael Romeo's first solo album, coming out the day that this discussion does. And again, there is a review and an interview of that up at sonicperspectives.com. So let's go on to topic number 2. It's a pretty vague one. We'll see where this takes us. There's a lot of ground to cover. But the general idea is simply 80s prog. So let's start with the classics, and I'm going to start with an area that's near and dear to my heart, and why I believe Rush, of all the great classic progressive rock bands, is the greatest. Because, yes, Pink Floyd, Genesis, all had their classic period, as Rush did. But I only think Rush really ran with the ball in the 80s and beyond, and was far more successful in that period than any of those other bands. You had Moving Pictures in the 80s. You had Power Windows in the 80s. And nothing Yes or Genesis did came close to those. Is anybody going to fight me on this? Is anybody else going to try and say that any of those bands held up during that time?
No, and as you know and everybody knows, I don't know much about Rush, but I totally agree with you about Yes, and especially Genesis, which I always say is by far my favorite '70s prog band, maybe my favorite prog band of all time. But every time I ever talk about Genesis with people or say something like that, I always say that Genesis died in 1980, and I stand by that. When Steve Hackett left, Genesis was done. It became a trio, and I wouldn't say it was Phil Collins' fault. It was all three of them, but they were a different band in the 80s. And I don't hold Yes as near and dear to my heart as I do Genesis, and I don't know if they went as far down that like pop rabbit hole. But yeah, in comparison to Rush, yeah, you're absolutely right. Or that Rush maintained it a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Gonzo, any thought on that, or are we going too far prog for you to comment?
I think Yes absolutely went way too far down the pop rabbit hole. I think that 90215 is unlistenable. I can't stand it, and that says absolutely nothing about the band. The band has Yes has undergone so many personnel changes, with people constantly coming in and out of that band. But the big change with that one was Trevor Rabin had replaced Steve Howe on guitar. I don't fault him entirely the same way I don't think Phil Collins should be faulted entirely for the change of the Genesis sound. And the guy's a remarkable musician. I just don't like the output that they put out in the 80s. It does nothing for me.
Yeah, and I know we're getting outside the prog realm now, and we're getting outside the 80s, in fact, when I make this comment. But just piggybacking off of those member changes, I think Blaze Bayley with Iron Maiden gets a bad rap because I think the songwriting for his 2 albums was much more to blame for them being poor than his voice ever was. Not that he was as good as Bruce Dickinson, but sometimes those timing things go hand in hand, and you want to find the easy culprit, but it's usually not that simple.
If I may, piggybacking on that point about Iron Maiden, I think that those 2 Blaze Bayley albums are better than the 2 Bruce Dickinson albums that preceded them.
Oh, they managed to be better than No Prayer for the Dying. Ooh,
I know, what a high bar, right?
Blasphemy.
And honestly, No Prayer would have been fantastic if it had only been 8 songs. There's a lot of filler on that album.
I was gonna say it would be fantastic if it was only like 3 or 4 songs. It was the no.
My Guide is catchy as all hell tune, and I like that one.
I want the No Prayer for the Dying EP. But let's bring things back to prog and the 80s. I'm glad no one fought me on Rush, because we would, well, maybe not, because we could have a nice long discussion on that. But there was some new bands that came in the 80s, and here's the one thing that hasn't changed in the month we were off. I take the time before the show to cut out these little snippets of songs, and then I forget to play them. So as we're about to talk about this, here's one of my favorites.
Yes! Yes!
Going to fade out just a little early because I can only cut 30-second clips with that program on my phone, but there was some classic bands to come out of the 80s. One would be IQ. I know we were going to talk about that, and another, of course, right there was Marillion on the prog side of thing, on the prog rock side of thing. But in general, I don't think you had the number or the scope of legendary acts coming out of the 80s as you certainly did in the 70s on the rock side. Now, Gonzo, I know you've made the point. What did we have kind of emerging on the metal side?
On the metal side, we had some little 4-piece from Austin, Texas, called Watchtower, that in their early days sounded like a pissed off Rush. Like, if you could imagine Slayer playing Rush songs or vice versa, that was their sound. And they took that sound, they ran with it. They're still kind of active these days, but I mean, like, almost 40 years later, they've still only put out 2 albums. Or no, they put out Mathematics just a couple years ago, and I haven't gotten around to buying it. But it's it is probably the band that is the most responsible for pushing the genre forward in the very beginning. This was before Fate's Warning, you know. If you were to take Watchtower and refine it, you would end up with Perfect Symmetry. Mm-hmm. You know, just to give you an idea of the influence that they had. Their bass player, Doug Keyser, was tapped for Metallica when Cliff Burton died. He turned it down. at least so the rumor goes.
Yes.
You know, Chuck Schuldiner or Lars Ulrich, these guys were big Watchtower fans back in the 80s. And I think you can especially hear the influence in Death's later music.
Mm-hmm. And another big one, I know Jordan has one big progressive metal act that came out of the 80s.
Huh?
I said I know you have another big progressive metal act that came out of the 80s.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, Dream Theater, of course.
That's not the one I was talking about.
Oh.
I know they technically started in the 80s, but Dream Theater's rise to fame was in the 90s. The big one to me would have been Queensryche.
Oh, yeah.
And
well, no, but I just wanted to add on even before that, though, because you mentioned Marillion and IQ, who I think initially kind of sounded alike, and then they both obviously came into their own, I think, a little bit more, one with a vocalist change, one without. But even with a band like Marillion, and I think a lot of other bands that came in the 80s, they immediately drew comparisons to 70s bands. So when Marillion came out, people just said, oh, it's just like, well, Genesis doesn't sound like Genesis anymore, but now Marillion is taking over, just like now people say Big Big Train is like modern Genesis, which is, I see that, but I also just totally disagree. So it's like even when you had new bands in the 80s, they were kind of almost inevitably compared to what came before them.
yeah, and I just saw Big Big Train for the first time at Night of the Prog. And I definitely see what the fuss is about there.
Yeah.
I was late to the game on them, but I can see, especially live, why people make such a big deal about them. And certainly the singer, I can see why he might draw comparisons to the theatrics of Peter Gabriel, no question there. But I don't think it sounds like Genesis necessarily. So I don't fully get that comparison, but I can see, bits and pieces of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say in general, and we'll talk about some more topics here, but my main 2 points thus far is I don't think there was as many legendary acts coming out of the 80s as there was the 70s, certainly, and I think those earlier bands that had come out in the 70s, in general weren't doing as strongly in the 80s, and I think prog did see a resurgence in the 90s, but I think the 80s may have been, especially on the prog rock side of things, a down period in general, and I don't think I'm making any sweeping statements here that isn't already pretty generally accepted, but is anybody going to defend the 80s and say they were as good as the decade before or after?
No. I think a trend that you start to see is, again, with Genesis and Yes being maybe the two biggest examples, but other bands like, like Gentle Giant, totally, like with Missing Piece and especially Civilian, like went towards just a hard rock, more streamlined, accessible sound. And even King Crimson, who a lot of people have like a favorite period, 70s, 80s, with Adrian Belew, and it was definitely a different style. But even they went towards like a song like Heartbeat, which is like a kind of, soppish like power ballad. So I think you just saw a lot of prog bands in the 80s going towards that like radio-friendly hit, and to a detrimental effect for the most part, I think.
Yeah, and you have here in your notes one I wasn't even thinking about, but you mentioned that the first Asia album came out in 1981. And if you talk about a supergroup of prog giants creating what was one really solid AOR album, it's one fantastic album, but as far as prog goes, a completely underwhelming career. I mean, that album and subsequent less good albums may sum up why prog died in the 80s, really.
Yeah, heat of the moment. Like, if you like it for what it is, and fine, but compared to what they all had all done in the 70s, a song like Heat of the Moment is just perplexing to me.
Yes, and again, I really love that first Asia album. I'm trying not to hate on it, but when you had the four guys there that were coming into it, it's kind of like you could have this is all we could come up with, not like 2 or 3 hits and then maybe other stuff. Like, it was all that AOR that no one was expecting. It kind of came out of nowhere. It was emblematic of what would happen to the genre in that decade for a large part, I think. And then you have in here as well in your notes, what did King Crimson do in the 80s versus the 70s? What did Pink Floyd do in that time, who we didn't really talk about? Now, I will say, I love the Final Cut. It is actually one of my favorite Floyd albums. So in that case, and I know I'm going to get blasphemied for this, I prefer the Final Cut to The Wall.
Go die, Nick.
I don't agree with you, but I think the Final Cut is way underrated, especially since I don't know if it's all related to The Wall, but you certainly have at least a couple songs on there that are directly tied to the same like story and purpose in Waters' life. So I'm surprised people don't talk about the Final Cut more, just at least in relation to The Wall, because it is a part of The Wall.
Yeah. And another band you have listed here, how many albums did King's X get out in the 80s?
Let me see. I don't know. I'm really familiar with Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. That's the one I know most. Okay,
but that was a big band that was heavily influential on a lot of others that did start in that time. And you did see, and you mentioned here, Echoland and Chant both technically started in 1989. I wouldn't call the 80s their decade by any stretch. Porcupine Tree technically started in 1987 with on the Sunday of Life. What a god-awful record. But generally, things at the end of the decade, yes, they were picking up towards the 90s, especially with, you just mentioned earlier, Dream Theater. So things began to happen, but I definitely think it was the downtime. But let's go, since we haven't heard from Gonzo in a while, give us 2-3 albums from the 80s, prog-related. What are some of the big diamonds from that era?
The album that you played at the beginning of this segment, Marillion, Clutching at Straws, is one of my favorite progressive rock albums ever. It is, in my opinion, it is the best thing that Phish has ever done. And it kind of goes to a greater point about the 80s kind of being like a low point for prog rock, and I think Marillion is one of the reasons that I disagree with that. If you were to compare, and granted, I only have a passing familiarity with Genesis's '70s material and Gentle Giant and so forth. But what I have heard does not reach me nearly as much as those first three Marillion albums. And I'm a big H fan too, by the way. But those first three Marillion albums, especially Clutching at Straws, reach something within me that few other pieces of music have been able to reach. And I think that it deserves to be lauded very, very highly for that reason. A lot of people also point to Misplaced Childhood as a high point in the Marillion catalog, and yeah, I do think it's a very good album. It's a little too, I don't know, it's a little too wistful for me. It's very good, but I like how grimy and dirty and ugly Clutching at Straws is. To me, it makes it a lot more human. The whole album is basically about decadence. It's about drinking yourself to death. You know, it's about debauchery. It's about the absolute worst aspects, worst things that anybody could do to themselves. And Fish wrote a whole album about it, and it's brilliant. And I love it for how human it is. And yeah, and Fugazi, same idea. Script, same idea. You know, these I said first three, I meant first four earlier. Marillion albums. They deserve special mention for keeping prog music alive in their own way. I do hear a lot of echoes of Genesis. A lot of people compare Fish to Peter Gabriel in Warm Wet Circles, giving it all away. That line, to me, he sounds like a dead ringer for Phil Collins, that other Genesis singer, you know. but in either case, the material is very, very strong, stands in its own right, and I will also give Fish some credit for his first two solo albums, even though I think the second one already came out like in 1990 or 91, Internal Exile. But in either case, on one of those two albums, there's a song called Credo that I think it ranks up there with Clutching at Straws. It could have been on Clutching at Straws, and it is very good.
Internal Exile, yes.
I think you're right. I don't know when exactly that came out off the top of my head, but it is very, very, very good. Marillion, by the way, one of my all-time favorite bands.
Yes, and I will take a moment to echo every one of your sentiments on Clutching at Straws. Back on when Prog and Power United did a review of that album, and basically, as someone who does not always pay attention to lyrics, on my side, I consider that the album I have been most emotionally touched by in many ways. Not that I identify with the themes of the album necessarily, but the themes are so clearly emoted and so hard-hitting. I have always held that album into a special place. It is an overall top 10 album for me of any band of any decade. So, you know, if you're going to go back, I think we'll both agree and check out one album, prog rock album from the 80s. We're certainly both in agreement that Clutching at Straws should be one of those.
Clutch on this straw.
Now, of course, on the progressive metal side, you also had Operation Mindcrime, which came out in that decade, which I absolutely love and adore. Rush had Power Windows, which is another one of the tops from that time period, I would say. And Jordan, I apologize. I forgot to open Skype chat at the beginning, so I missed a lot of things you were trying to note to me. But do you have any top albums from that time frame?
I mean, honestly, Operation Mindcrime is one of my favorite progressive metal albums. I love that album from start to finish, and it's way influential. And I don't know. Never mind. I was going to say Pleasant Shade of Grey, but I don't know if that is from the 80s.
No, it's definitely 90s.
1997.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm way off with that then. I mean, I agree with you guys about Clutching at Straws, not to keep saying it, but I think I do prefer H's stuff more, but I definitely agree that Marillion is its own band, and they did phenomenal stuff with Fish. And the Final Cut, I already said, I think is way underrated. I like Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, which is from '89, I think. Yeah, those are probably my top ones off the top of my head.
Yeah, and then going into lesser known bands, there's don't get me wrong, there's plenty of good stuff in the 80s. It's not like it's just the few that we mentioned here, but in general, down. And actually, now that you mention it, you have here Enchant starts in 1989. Did A Blueprint for the World come out in 89?
Let me see.
I think
I just wrote those down as like anything I could think of that would pertain to the topic.
Yeah, because if that's the case, A Blueprint for the World is an amazing album too, and one of the honestly would rocket itself into one of the tops from that decade as well. So I'm going to keep talking here and making words flow together until you look up that fact and confirm.
No, that's from 93.
93 indeed.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, it seemed a little too early for it, but you never know. So, okay, well, let's do this. Let's go on to some music news. And again, I'm only going to hit on some top releases from each day, as we have to cover a lot of ground here. But a lot of it relates to things that we talked about on prior Talking Perspectives. June 29th, we had Bruce Dickinson did Scream for Me Sarajevo DVD and soundtrack. Now, I'm sure some of you, Gonzo saw this. He saw the only screening in San Antonio. How was it? I still haven't seen it, and it's supposed to be really good.
Scream for Me Sarajevo basically runs like a CNN documentary. Don't go in there expecting to get rocked, because there's not a whole lot of concert footage, and the concert footage that does exist is really bad, because you got to remember that concert took place during the siege of Sarajevo, which lasted well over 2 years, far longer than the siege of Stalingrad, for example. Mm-hmm. There was a full-on ethnic cleansing / genocide / religious war going on in the former Yugoslavia back then. This is the same war that inspired the Savage's Dead Winter Dead album that came out at about that same time. But this particular concert is noteworthy for the fact that it even took place. I didn't realize that it was also a free concert, and all the trouble that Bruce and his band and his management and the promoters and all the trouble that they went through just arriving into Sarajevo. Like, it involved them riding in the back of an 18-wheeler for several hours and going through multiple checkpoints and going through combat zones and this and that, all to play a free concert. Is mind-blowing. It is a very, very, very interesting film, and I highly recommend that anybody that is into Bruce or into Maiden check it out, because the amount of dedication that guy has for his craft is pretty astounding.
Yeah, there are certainly a few people that I would say are more respected in general in the metal world than Bruce Dickinson. He does seem to do it all, and he has seemed to have a certain mythical aura about him at this point, even before this came out. And I think this certainly will probably only add to that. I do look forward to finally seeing that. The other big June 29th release was Fate's Warning with Live Over Europe. And, of course, we talked about that in Talk Perspectives, and there was an interview with Ray Alder, and I think a review of that at some point, too. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So all that up at Perspectives, we certainly covered that a lot, and with good reason. We all really loved it. July 6th, we talked about this. Devin Townsend Project released Ocean Machine live at the Ancient Roman Theater Plovdiv, and in watching the promo for that so many times, I got so tempted. I finally watched the other night the Anathema Universal Blu-ray that was also filmed there.
Ooh, so good.
So
good.
Jordan, you've seen that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so good. So, while you should pick up the new Devin Townsend Project, also pick up that damn Universal set if you don't already have it. Same conductor, same venue, absolutely magical concert.
And he's also worked with Catatonia, Paradise Lost, Opeth. He's done this quite a bit, and I think you and I did that interview together, didn't we?
Yes.
He talked about this. He
Yes.
talked about about how prolific this particular conductor is in the metal world for doing this. So.
And soon, all this hard work is going to pay off when he gets the biggest act he's ever needed, Sons of Apollo. But, they are...
Psychotic Symphony.
I think they are. It's only a month or two. I think Sons of Apollo is doing their orchestra concert there. But the other thing that come out July 6th was Lucifer with Lucifer 2, and there's a review of that up on the site. I want to say Rodrigo did that, but I'm not 100% on that, so don't quote me on that. July 13th, we had Mystery with Lies and Butterflies released at Night of the Prog. Scott Medina did a review of that. Again, we talked a lot about Between the Buried and Me. Automata 2 came out that day. Mr. Big Live from Milan, and Obscura with Diluvium. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. July 20th, Enchant, A Dream Imagined, the big box set. Now, usually I don't do reissues or box sets in this portion, but I have to say, if you are at all thinking about checking out Enchant, you can get these boxes pretty damn cheap for box sets, and it should be an absolute definite buy. Enchant has a really strong discography, and to have it all there together, I only need the bonus material, so I haven't bought it yet, but I may very well, just for that bonus material. Epica had Epica Verse Attack on Titan EP that day. And finally, coming up to the day the podcast is released, July 27th, we already mentioned Michael Romeo. Redemption, A Long Night's Journey into Day. Gonzo has an interview with Nick Van Dyke. Now, I haven't got a chance to listen to that promo yet, so I'm just going to listen to it on Friday when it comes out. Gonzo, what can I expect?
Expect to be rewarded for repeated listens.
Okay, very good. And then we have Chris Caffery with The Jester's Court, Dee Snider for The Love of Metal, Hailstorm with Vicious, and Tarja with Act 2, all coming out this Friday. Didn't really have much for news. I saw that Shineback has an album coming out in September, which features Simon Godfrey. Very much looking forward to that. And I figure,
like all his Facebook posts.
Yeah, oh my God, Simon Godfrey is the best Facebook poster.
Is he better than Gilbert Gottfried?
Well, he's probably just as funny and not a professional comedian, so there is that.
He's funny.
He posts stories, usually revolving around, he takes daily dog walks in the morning in the Philadelphia area. I actually know the park or the area where he does this, but like the oddest stories come out of this, and they are just, he writes them in such a way they're just hilarious to read. So not only should you listen to his music, you should friend him and follow his stories, because they are amazing. And I really just want to take a walk with him and his dog one day. That's like a new life goal at this point. And also, I figured since I was over there, I did 2 weeks in Europe and topped it off at the end with the night of the Prog Festival, the first 2 days. Do you guys have any questions about what that festival was like, or anything prior to? I'm going to try to put a review out, but any questions on the acts that were playing, or anything about the festival or the atmosphere over there? General Europe questions. Anything you guys got for me that?
Yeah, I'll go. You mentioned the Riverside song, so what did you think of the new? You said it was an alternate version, but what did you think of the new material?
So, okay, the intro track for the new Riverside album, Wasteland, is only about, I think it was like a minute or 90 seconds long, he said. And the version that they did was a little bit longer, probably like 2 minutes. But it was just, it's an intro track, and they did it up a little bit. And I liked it, but there wasn't a lot there to go on. I think this Friday, the same day this podcast released, Riverside actually announced that they're releasing the first single. So I would look much more to that than any YouTube video of the song they played as far as a better idea of what the album's going to sound like, because this was a special thing they did for that audience who they were really appreciative of. They played very early in their career to a very receptive crowd at Night of the Prog, I guess, and they were just trying to do something special for that. But I don't have any great impressions of that new material just yet. Anything else?
Why didn't you go the year that Fish played all of Misplaced Childhood?
Why didn't I go? Well, because I do not have infinite times or monies, or else I would go every year. I have consistently said, one of the reasons I was really happy to finally do this is I have watched many of the European Prog festivals over the year, including Prog Power Europe, Be Prog, My Friend, 2 Days Plus One. There's others, but consistently year after year, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, Night of the Prog has always had one of, if not the best lineups year after year after year. So it's always been a goal to go to that one. I'm glad I finally did, but there are many, many, many fantastic lineups I have missed in the past there.
How was the Sea Within?
Okay, so I'm going to mention this in my review a little bit. The Sea Within had some issues, and they pulled it together by the end, but I have to say, as much as I still think their album is perhaps the best album of the year, I was a little underwhelmed by the live performance, and part of it was they started off with some sound issues, which really seemed to bug, especially Royna Stolt. And he seemed to be struggling early on. Now, he got his groove back halfway through, but let me say, there's 2 people I was really impressed with. I finally got to see Marco Minnemann live, and I really enjoyed his playing, and he did a fantastic job. I was also super impressed by Tom Brislin, who I'm not overly familiar with. And he's doing a set, Tom Brislin and Friends, at Prog Stock. And so now I'm really, really looking forward to that, where before it was like, oh, that's going to be neat. But now I'm really looking forward to see what he does with that. And then, of course, you had the fact that Jonas Ringgold wasn't there, but Pete Trewavas was filling in, and that was fine. But then you had Daniel, who was the primary singer on the album, not there. So Casey did more vocals. Royna, who didn't sing on the album, sang more. Tom Brislin sang a little bit. Pete sang a little bit. So it was a different experience, and I think it was good, like I say, especially like the second half of the show. But they struggled early, and it didn't have the immediate wow factor that I was kind of hoping for. But they did pull it together by the end.
What did H do, Hogarth?
So that was on Sunday. I was only there Friday and Saturday. He played with Islanders Bane, if I remember correctly, but I wasn't actually there for that, so I can't speak directly to that.
Ed, did you see Antimatter?
I did see Antimatter. I will say, of the 2 days I saw, there was no band that I disliked, and that's often the case with these types of festivals, but certainly there have been like Rozfest and things like that where there's been one or two acts at least in a weekend where it's like, okay, this not only is this not impressing, but I just really don't like this. But Antimatter, just like everyone else, was good. I will say that the acts that I went in not knowing, Retrospective wowed me the most. They're the one CD from an unknown band that I got. What was there? Not that I won't pick up more as time goes on, but I definitely wanted to get theirs. But Antimatter was very good as well.
I was kind of curious about them because they started life as running tangentially to Anathema. When Duncan Patterson left Anathema after the Alt 4 album, Alternative 4, he formed Antimatter with that guy Mick, doing that trip hop thing, and he only did a couple of albums with them. And I want to say that when Vincent Cavanoff very, very briefly left Anathema, like in the early 2000s, I think that he was a part of Antimatter for a very brief while. I could be mistaken, but I saw Anathema in Monterrey, Mexico, about a year ago, and Duncan Patterson, the former bass player, now lives in Monterrey, Mexico. And he actually joined the band for a few songs at the very end of the show. They played about the first half of Alternative 4 and a few songs from Judgment. And these are songs that haven't been played in ages. And it was their first time performing together since the late 90s.
Yeah.
So that has nothing to do with Antimatter anymore. I don't know why I brought it up. I guess I just felt like showing off. It was a wonderful set.
I will say the two big surprises of the festival for me, as far as even bands I went in to see, like bands like Threshold I'd seen at Rozfest, and they delivered again, especially because I was up front this time. Riverside delivered the performance I expect from Riverside. This one I've seen them a bunch of times now. But one, I mentioned it kind of earlier, Big Train. You know, I've been getting into them more and more and seeing them live. They just fantastic live, especially Nick DiVirgilio, Richard Sloblum, whose name I'm sure I'm butchering once again. They just delivered such a good live show. They had visuals, which most of the bands did not, which was cool. And the other was Camel. Now, having followed, as I said, I usually see the lineups for different festivals, and I'm very active in looking at the cruises and things like that. I have not seen Camel play a lot of shows. I don't get the feeling that they play a lot anymore. But for how old they are as a band, they still really brought it. They were fantastic. I was not expecting them to be a highlight of the 2 days I was there, but they certainly were. They were fantastic. So if you do get a chance,
do you know if they played a lot of older stuff, like their first few albums?
Yeah, it certainly focused more on the classic period.
I love that stuff. throwing that in there.
Yes, and it was funny. We were getting to the end of the set, and I had a friend there. Well, you know Sam, but most of the listeners will not know Sam. But they hadn't played Lady Fantasy yet, and they went off at the end of the encore. And I just turned to them like, they better play Lady Fantasy, or else this whole night has been a disappointment. Of course, they came back and played Lady Fantasy, so I was happy. That is the correct encore song, I think. But All right, well, let's do this. We're going to go into our third topic. Now, when we last did this, what seems like forever ago now, we wrapped up the first half of 2018, and now we are going to go over what we're looking forward to in the second half of 2018. And it was funny, Jordan shared his comments on our little note sheet, and I was like, yeah, that's basically all I'm looking forward to. He just perfectly summed it up for me. So as opposed to stealing your thunder, Jordan, why don't you start off and tell us what you're looking forward to?
Well, the first one I put up there, I feel like I'm kind of cheating because I've heard it for the last month, but the new Fido, Infernal, after 7 years since No Torch, I think, yeah. So I can't say I'm looking forward to Infernal since I've been listening to Infernal, but I'm more looking forward to how people react to it and what they think of it. And I've been talking with Fido through email over the last few days to see if I'm like hearing it right and if my thoughts are right. And he said that I'm right. So I don't know how much I can say about it other than it takes if you were expecting like Doomsday Afternoon Part 2 and all that, like especially the most tricky aspects, like the last song, Micro Death Soft Star, I think it's called.
Yes.
There's moments of that, and it's 2 discs, and the first disc is definitely harkening more back to The Great Leap, and the second disc is definitely more Doomsday Afternoon. There's tons of references to both of those, as well as another album that I didn't really even know was part of it, but if you rearrange the letters of Sour Dome, you should figure out what other album song it's referencing. So I'll just say sort of that I'm looking forward to the response, because, yeah, it's very... To me, I told them it sounds more like a play to me, not so much in like histrionics, but of like interludes and almost like soliloquies or monologues. But once you fully realize what Infernal's going for, I think it's brilliant, and I think it's a great follow up and well worth the wait. And
a real quick story about that: when we were at Rozfest, I got the chance to meet Fido for the first time, and one of the discussions we had was he was usually would come to Rozfest, and he stopped coming for the last few years. And I asked him why, and he said, well, because every time I came, all that everyone would ever ask me was when Infernal was going to be out, and I can finally like say it'll be out this year, and so I'm here now. Because that question won't just constantly get berated on me with no answer. So yes, it is nice that is finally coming out. I've been very much looking forward to that. Your next one there, Jordan.
The Pineapple Thief, Disillusion. Which I just got the CD for. I haven't listened to it yet, but the Pineapple Thief has always been one of my favorite modern bands.
Wait, is that out?
No, it's out at the end of August, I think.
Oh, I thought you said you just got the CD for it.
I did.
You got
the promo for it.
Oh, that's not a CD. That is where my confusion came in. Or did you actually get a physical promo?
Yeah.
Whoa! As a band that still sent a physical promo?
Yeah, they sent me the CD. I'm looking at it now.
Dear Lord. Oh, my God. Did they pull that out of the 1990s? I mean, what the hell?
I mean, I'm always appreciative. I collect all those little promos.
Oh, yeah. So would I, but, like, it's just so rare to see them anymore. That's really cool. You're going to have
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Continue.
No. But yeah, I mean, I haven't listened to it yet. I've heard other people who've heard it say that it's, like, softer and quieter. But I think Bruce is one of the best songwriters in the genre. I wasn't like I didn't dislike Your Wilderness by any means, but I didn't think it was as good as the few before it.
Agreed.
So I'm looking forward to this one. I'm sure it's at least good. And I know that he always appreciates honest feedback and not sort of like people kissing his butt and stuff. So that I'm definitely looking forward to hearing as soon as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to continue, or you want
to? You just continue.
Okay. The next one is the Riverside, because Riverside and Mars, I think, is another one of the best songwriters, whether it's with Lunatic Soul or Riverside. And I've heard that this one is darker in tone and subject matter. So, I mean, I love what Riverside's done so far. I don't expect to be disappointed here. And the next is the new Cohen and Cambria, sort of going mainstream, I guess. But I love Cohen and Cambria, too. I mean, Good Apollo Part 1, I think, is easily their best album. But everything they've done, I like to some extent.
Okay, we're going to make a few comments here. First, Riverside, yes, having seen them again, first off, Marius not only a fantastic songwriter, one of the best live bassist tones you're ever going to find.
Oh, yeah.
So just live bassist, period. But moving back to Coheed and Cambria here, a couple of things.
Okay.
First off, Good Apollo 1, yes, their best album. It's absolutely fantastic. The Never Ender of that was amazing.
Yeah.
Nextly, if that's a word. So when they did the Afterman and they had the first single, Domino the Destitute, it got me so hyped for that album, and then it really lived up to that. And then they
is that the second song on the Afterman, the Key Entity Extinction 1?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's up there with No World for Tomorrow and Welcome Home as like one of their, like, the three of those are tied to me as like the best, like, prog rock in your face epic Coheed song.
Yes, Domino is absolutely fantastic. I agree with that. And then they released the first single for this album after the last album was okay. I mean, it was not anything special. And actually, Gonzo, are you familiar with Coheed?
I am.
Okay, so we'll get your thoughts then. I wasn't sure if you were a fan or not, but then, to have this album, we know we're going back into the Armory Wars universe. We have this strong first single. I'm really excited that this is gonna, really get back to some classic Coheed. I'm very excited for this. Gonzo, what are you thinking?
I actually haven't listened to Coheed in a very long time. I do agree that that the album that you guys call Good Apollo 1, the one that I call simply Coheed 4, because it's got that big I and the V on the cover of it, so I just call it 4. Yeah, so I really like that one. I really like the one that came before it. I really like the era of the Black Rainbow. These are all very solid albums. The most recent one that I have is the Black Rainbow. And the direction that they were going on in that one is one that I really appreciated because it was a lot more heavy. I love 4, Good Apollo 1. It was a little. It took a while for me to really get into it though because it sounded so happy, but it's also so perverse lyrically. I'm gonna admit that I never could keep track of the Armory stories or any of that. No. It's just I don't have the time to dedicate.
Although.
To just figuring that out.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I was initially disappointed with Year of the Black Rainbow because it is, in terms of the storyline, it's the first chapter. It's before,
yes, it preceded the previous albums. Correct.
And from what I remember, again, I could be wrong, but the first 3 albums start with that theme. Mm-hmm. And then No World for Tomorrow brings that back, I think, somewhere later. But from what I remember, Year of the Black Rainbow has no musical nods to the saga. So it almost, to me, felt like a collection of songs that wasn't related. But I could be wrong. Maybe there's something really subtle.
And that's something that I kind of liked about it because it was just a collection of good songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the only reason I read the comic collections for the first 2 albums and also the graphic novel for Year of the Black Rainbow, which is frankly the only reason I know it comes before the other one, if not for press releases and things. But yeah, I do not pretend to follow the story really well. I will say, Gonzo, you absolutely must listen to Ascension and Descension, the 2 Afterman albums, if you enjoy the Good Apollo era. But want a little bit more of a metal edge to it. You're gonna really, really enjoy those albums. So certainly there. So yes, Coheed and Cambria, a big one coming out. We did get a release date. I forget what it is, but I think they finally did give a release for
October 9th, I think.
Yeah, something like that. So very much looking forward to that. And if it wasn't for this trip to Europe, I would have gotten the Super Deluxe box set again, but I was able to hold off since since Europe is expensive.
Yeah. And then I added one more that I don't know if you saw. Nick.
I see that.
But No Sound. But talking to Giancarlo about that a bit too. I love No Sound. I think they're, along with I don't know why I always put them together, but along with Anathema and the Pineapple Thief, I think they do emotional songwriting. They're among the best emotional songwriters, and in terms of creating this environment and the soundscape with classy touch, tasteful instrumentation. Their last album, especially in Celebration of Life, that song just hits me. So I can't wait to hear what he does with this one.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Gonzo, what are you looking forward to here in the second half?
Well, I am looking forward to a bunch of concerts. The one at the top of my list is Prog Power USA, which I think you're going to be there too, aren't you?
So here's the thing. Because of another tour I'll talk about shortly and the fact that, again, Europe is expensive, I am most likely selling my tickets for days 1, 2, and 4. So my plan is to just fly down on Friday morning, see Friday's run of shows, and then leave sometime Saturday. But here's what I need from you. Because I'm only there one day at the Ardmore afterwards, we have to get in 4 days of drinking that night.
Okay, now, I would normally be up to that challenge because it is the Fartmore, again, it is Prog Power, and there's a whole lot of stupidity that needs to be done. However, Friday is going to be a very, very busy night for me because I'm going to be, manically bashing my head and manically shooting at just about every band that performs that night. Like the Friday night lineup is practically the reason that I'm there.
Yes, which is why that's the one day I'm still going to be there.
Yeah, but at the same time, I can't contain my disappointment that James LaBrie canceled. He was one of the acts that I was looking forward to seeing the most because Static Impulse and Impermanent Resonance are albums that I absolutely adore. I mean, they're basically Soilwork style. Swedish melodic death metal with LaBrie on vocals, and they sound fucking great. I love them.
I fully agree, and that was why every year at Prog Power, you almost know there's going to be a cancellation or two, and it's just about how much it's going to affect you. And I would say the 3 bands I was looking forward to seeing the most were Redemption, who are thankfully still playing, James LaBrie, and King Crow. And those last 2 both canceled. And while there's still plenty of stuff I'd like to see otherwise, it's just, like I say, with limited funds and time off, it's just going to be tough. I'd love to see Nocturnal Rites and who's playing last that night. And Voyager again. But it's just that's 2 days earlier. So yeah, it's unfortunate. Probably only going to come down for the one day, but I'm very much looking forward to that one day because along with what was already mentioned, Sons of Apollo's playing that night, Redemption's playing.
Persephone! Oh my god, I can't wait!
But also, one of the first power prog albums I ever got, and it was an album that, given how relatively unknown this band is, it's surprising how many years ago I got this album, but Return to Heaven Denied being played in its entirety by Labyrinth. Very much excited for that.
Labyrinth are like one of the 1.5 power metal bands I like, and Return to Heaven Denied is a big part of the reason why. That is a power album that has stuck with me all these years. And Return to Heaven Denied 2, which came out just a few years ago.
Not too
also
shabby.
Very.
Yes.
I love that album. It was a definite return to form. I typically don't like power metal, but Labyrinth are at their best when they're playing power metal. They are that good. But the bands for me that night are going to be Persephone and Redemption.
Of course.
I cannot wait.
I've only seen Redemption play half-hour sets opening for Dream Theater, so I'm very much looking forward to finally seeing a full set from them.
And you mentioned
Persephone.
Sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
No, I was just saying I really like the last Persephone album.
Oh, it's amazing. Like the only album that topped it for me last year was Urn, the Enable Viscaris album. And that came out in December, which I think speaks to how good that album is. But getting back to Prog Power, the one good thing about King Crow canceling is that Oceans of Slumber took their slot. And with Oceans of Slumber playing, and with Redemption playing, and with Tom England being the singer in Redemption, and with Tom England having guested on the last Oceans of Slumber album, I got my money on a guest appearance. Don't tell anybody.
Except for all the listeners.
Except for everyone who downloads this podcast, yes. Yes, but if you download this and you listen, you can't just tell people what you've heard. You must force them to download and listen to it themselves.
Yes.
That's so key.
And reshare and
subscribe.
blah, blah, blah.
That's right. That's absolutely right. All right, so Prog Power is obviously a big one. Any other concerts you're looking forward to? Don't steal my thunder. Leave the big one for me. You know which one I want.
Elton John?
Yeah, no.
Hey, Elton John's great, dude.
I don't doubt that. I would actually go to see him if it wasn't for the ridiculous ticket prices and the inability to get tickets at those ridiculous prices.
You could argue that Tickin is a prog song since it's 10 minutes.
I could, but I don't care to.
For Ben, Love Lies Bleeding. You know, I mean, that's prog, if you ask me.
All right, so what other concerts are you looking forward to, Gonzo?
Winter Sun, but mostly for the opener, Nobly Viscaris. Dude! yes. I've only seen Nobly once. They were fantastic.
Is that their cool fan name, Nobly?
No. The cool fan name is Neo.
Okay.
But I call them Nobly because I'm dumb. So Winter Sun, it's gonna be a lot of fun to see those guys. I missed them on their 2013 tour. I'm not gonna miss them this time, but that's mostly Nobly's fault. I cannot wait to see Nobly Viscaris. As far as I'm concerned, they are the most important band in prog metal these days. They are fucking awesome. Behemoth, I'm also looking forward to that. I recently saw a video to one of their more recent songs. It was called "Oh Father, Oh Son, Oh Satan" or something like that. One of the creepiest music videos I've seen in a very long time, and Adam Darsky's vocal delivery at the spoken part at the end is chilling, and I hate spoken parts in music. His is chilling. It's going to be awesome. Leprous, of course, Ghost, Elton John.
All right, very good. Now let me piggyback off that and go over other few concerts I'm looking forward to, and I'll save the best for last here. Really looking forward to getting to try Progstock this year, just for the experience of what that's going to be like. They probably worked out a lot of kinks in the first year, so this year I'm hoping it goes pretty nicely. Not that I don't know if there's any problems or anything the first year, but just generally that the first year usually presents some issues. But especially, let me tell a story real quick. When I was planning the Europe trip, knowing that there's a lot of bands and things in Europe that I might get to see that I couldn't over here, I definitely wanted to get something music related. And my first hope was that either Haken would announce a London show, or IQ would announce a England show during that time frame. And that never happened, so I ended up putting the Prague at the end, because IQ is one of those big bands that I just still was very near the top of my bands I still needed to see. So I planned the whole trip, and then boom, they get announced for Progstock. So I am super psyched to see them. And then we have the big tour that was announced in the last day I was in Ireland, which was Haken, Leprous, and Bent Knee. And a few days prior to the tour, I was having some dinner to that announcement. I was having dinner with some friends over there, including Ray Hearn from Haken, who filled me in on that tour coming up. And I just knew the moment that announcement was made, there was going to be people losing their freaking minds, because Haken has a strong following now. Leprous is gaining a lot of popularity in the States. They are related acts, of course. Einar guested on Affinity. And Bent Knee, for a younger band, is gaining a lot of notoriety of late. I mean, this is a hell of a bill. Is anyone not excited for this freaking tour?
No, I'm super pumped for that.
I'm wearing a Leprous shirt right now.
See, and that's funny. There's going to be plenty of people at that show for each band, and I think there's going to be plenty of new fans made. I think it's great pairings. I think there's going to be people that like all three, but it is such a good, solid lineup. Even though it's not a tour that I personally saw, I liken it to when Leprous, Between the Buried and Me, and Deer Hunter played recently, and so many of my friends were super psyched on that tour. I mean,
it was a great tour.
Yeah, and this tour, my friends list is just a fire with people. Of course, Haken especially, but a fire with people. Looking forward to this tour, and I'm planning on 4 shows as of now: Philly, New York, Boston, and Chicago.
Which will take you to what, 21 times that you've seen Haken?
Let's see, that would take me to 21 times, I believe. Very good. No, yes, a little bit, yes.
Well, I guess I'll see you at the Underground Arts one then.
Yes, I mean, did you really have any doubt that I wouldn't be doing Philly?
Oh, no. And I'm like, I'm so happy for Bentley. I've been following them since Say So came out. I've been helping them a little bit, been friends with them, and I'm just so happy that they get to reach that larger audience. And going back to what you just said about like the other tour with BT Bam and Deer Hunter, I would like just like Deer Hunter was sort of the outlier of those three, even though to me they're maybe the best of the three. I think Bentley is stylistically the most different compared to the other two. Mm-hmm. But so I'm just hoping that the audience for Haken and Leprous are receptive to them if they aren't already fans.
I think the Haken crowd at least will be. I've obviously seen Haken in a lot of different places. I have a very good sense of their fan base, I think, and I think they will be very receptive.
Well, good, because Bentley deserves it. They're great. Now and they're so nice and humble.
I'm gonna kill Gonzo a little bit here, but the only thing I wish for this tour is they have VIP packages again, and it's a little bit more expensive than last time around. And part of that justification is that the VIP time is with both Haken and Leprous. And I wanted to mention, to message Haken and be like, "Can I pay less if I promise only to talk to you guys?" But no, this is the thing, and here's the cool thing.
Can I hit you like really hard?
If we do four days worth of drinking at Prog Power, you can hit me at the end of that because I won't feel a thing.
I'm gonna hit you so many times, just once, so many times.
But no, that's the cool thing because Bent Knee, I get the hype, but I just cannot quite get into their music. But I think seeing them live, and now I'm listening to Land Animal a lot more to kind of prepare for that. I think that'll be a cool, different experience. Leprous has left me in recent years. I loved Bilateral, and everything since has been a bit of a disappointment for me. But I think, again, I've been listening to Melina now, and I think seeing them live, will hopefully bring me back into the fold. So
dude,
even
Melina and Cole and the Congregation are so dark and grimy, kind of like Clutching at Straws was compared to the albums that preceded it. I think that it's an obvious step forward. And right up until that I discovered No Oblivious Skyris, I considered Leprous to be the kings of modern progressive metal. So just as you suggested that I check out those Coheed albums, I'm going to suggest that you check out those Leprous albums. Give them some spins because they pay off.
I have given all of them some spins. I'm not speaking from a point of ignorance on them. I'm speaking on a point of I got Cole and it was like, okay, this is a little bit of a step down from Bilateral, but it's a different style, and that's okay. And then
it is different.
And then each subsequent album came out, it's like, this is more of the same, but even worse. And I did not, none of it has grabbed me the way that Bilateral did, but I am going to, as, the concerts approach, be giving them more of a shot, and hopefully seeing them live will spin my opinion back around a little bit. So I certainly will be trying. Can't promise the results, but we'll see what happens.
I will grant that Bilateral is an excellent album.
That it very much is.
It's excellent. The ones that follow are just very, very different.
All right. And as far as the studio releases, like I said, Jordan really hit on the big ones for me. Riverside, Fido, Coheed, Redemption, another big one to look forward to. So lots of great stuff coming out. Anything else for the good of the order coming out this year? I'm going to take that as a solid and resounding no.
Trying to think. The Opeth isn't coming out until beginning of next year, I guess.
Yes, but we're talking about albums worth caring about and anticipating.
I still have some hope.
I'll throw in the Opeth, even if it's not this
year. So, all right. Well, we'll see when Opeth comes out. If it does, I'm sure we'll be talking about that closer to that time. So, thank you guys very much. Again, my name is Nick, and we've been doing another episode of Talking Perspectives. Please make sure you subscribe, if possible, to get this and our other audio content, including a lot of interviews that I mentioned tonight. And like us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Do we have an Instagram? I assume we have an Instagram. And anywhere else that you can find Sonic Perspectives, please follow. So thank you all, Gonzo, Jordan, and have a good night.